Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. I am so excited to be back. We were off the past month and just got back from AirVenture 2021. And after skipping a year of getting out there to Oshkosh, I have to tell you, it was absolutely fantastic. I'm sure some of you made it out there, and for those of you who didn't, I'm going to share just a little bit of our trip with you before we bring on our guest. I am so excited also of our guest this evening, which is Mike Wankum, pilot and meteorologist for WCVB in Boston here. So really excited to have Mike on the show. And as I said, it's just great to be back. And it was such a wonderful opportunity to meet so many of you actually in person who have watched the show, and we got to spend some time together and talk. And so I'd like to take you a little bit, if you bear with me, through our trip. Before we get started though, again, this tonight's show will be recorded and available on SocialFlight's YouTube channel. Just search on one word, SocialFlight, on YouTube, and be sure to get the SocialFlight mobile app and just go to socialflight.com, and you'll be able to see all of the other events happening in general aviation with destinations, places to fly, and so many more things. So with that, let me share a few pictures and just kind of go through a little photo tour of some of our journey. And it starts here, which is very fitting due to weather, with a diversion of what we planned on doing on our route out. And so instead of all the time that we spent planning the journey and exactly how we planned on getting out there, we actually had to divert because of strong weather and thunderstorms that were over upper Michigan and all the way across the lake there. And so we decided to go to Battle Creek, Michigan. And Battle Creek, Michigan is the home of Waco aircraft. And I have to tell you, for anyone who is even considering being in this area and flying around locally, you need to go to Battle Creek and see the Waco factory. They're extremely welcoming. During the week of AirVenture, they had a fuel price that was absolutely stunning. It was $3.50, and you get a tour of everything that they're doing there. And then they have a gourmet restaurant as well. And I just want to show you some of the pictures here. These aircraft are modern versions of these historic biplanes, and they're just breathtaking. The craftsmanship's fantastic, and it's just something to be around them and check them all out in person. And of course, if you're really going to see the kind of most extreme version of just playful aviation, it's going to be this Waco on floats, which pretty much is something you're not going to see anywhere else, and it is an actual production aircraft from Waco. Now, they took this facility, and their company was purchased, and then they put $100 million into this facility, which includes the factory and an FBO and an amazing restaurant. And believe it or not, anytime that you fly in there, they will give you a free meal at the restaurant if you fill up on gas, and you're talking about a gourmet restaurant. So it's pretty amazing. And it has a beautiful deck over it. This just kind of shows you a little about it. And the last thing I'll share about this one stop is, which I just wanted to feature here, is something very interesting, which is the menu has 3 special meals at the bottom. And they are special meals that are a little bit pricey, about $490,000 for the first one, $270,000 for the second one, $650,000 for the next. And they're cute little things because they're buying an airplane and they're showing you the airplane and what meal you get. And when I talked to them about this, they said, believe it or not, when someone buys an airplane from them, they actually do get the meal. So it's really cool, and they're a great group of people. Please check it out and visit them. We did make it to the show, of course, in the end. And then from that point, the first thing, there's a video on YouTube I encourage you to go check out of Orbis, the flying eye hospital, the only flying eye hospital that is an MD-10, and this video will take you through it if you look at our YouTube channel, and it is just unbelievable what they are able to do through this organization to restore sight to so many people and to have such an impact on the world. I had no idea not only the numbers of people who suffer from blindness worldwide, but that 80% of blindness in the world is completely curable through surgery. and they are on a mission not just to do it themselves, but to teach. And this is something you should take a look at, learn about the organization, and see how you can support them, because it's truly amazing work that these folks are doing. And we're very, very fortunate to get a personal tour and check that out and make a video of it. Now, with that, of course, you're in Wisconsin, and you know that when you see a sign that says cheese curds and venison sausage. So we joined up with Brian Turner of Just Plain Silly and went to our first stop there, where we went down to Fisk, where the arrivals are happening. Check that out. And Brian, I'm pretty sure, caused a few accidents while we were there, but it's, you know, I'm not going to take any responsibility. I was just spotting planes. I'm pretty sure anywhere I was spotting planes, he was looking in the other direction anyway. So hopefully, if you were flying in, you were listening to the air traffic controllers and didn't accidentally listen to Brian. There is a video also out there from our show there on Stealing the Show that shows you. I'm a huge fan of Brian's and a friend, and he is really fun. So check out Just Plain Silly, and the video is actually on our channel at SocialFlight, and I think you'll enjoy that as well. With that, we walked the show, checked out some wonderful things, and Jake got to hop into this Cessna 195. We learned and met so many people. It was really wonderful, and just gives you kind of a picture of AirVenture if you weren't able to make it out there yourself. There was a great announcement. Our friends over at Best Tugs this is Mark Patey, since it's pretty hard to tell the two apart. And Mark there, they had a great announcement of a product, which you can see also out there. And then Mike Patey flew in Scrappy for everyone to see, which was great. In fact, the day before when we were there, and I was talking with Mark, and he said, Mike's in the air, he's got 6 more hours to fly off, and then he's able to get it here. So it literally was up until the last minute there. As I mentioned, though, what I really want to do is thank all of you before we start our show with our guests this evening, because we ran a program to meet as many of all of you as possible, and it was a snag some swag, that if you happen to see us at AirVenture and you knew about us, you used SocialFlight, or you saw this show, come on over and we'd bring something, we'd give you a little gift. And we came out in the Bonanza loaded to max gross weight with all sorts of fun things, and we left pretty much empty. And I was thrilled to take some selfies with some absolutely wonderful folks. It's just, aviation is such an incredible community. That's why we're all here. That's why we've made it through the pandemic together this way, and that's why we're going to continue to be able to do this into the future. And it was great to just spend time with everyone. And I think I'll probably post some things on where we're going to be going in the future, and we'll keep the plane stocked also with swag as we move forward. This is Corey Robin at the SOS tent later on. Of course, if you've seen our show, then you've seen Kevin Lacey on it as well. And all sorts of just incredible, wonderful people that we got to spend time with at the show. Now, they're leading into talking about weather this evening. There's something that happened out there. I'm sure, unless you were hanging under a rock somewhere, you were aware that there was a pretty major weather event that happened at AirVenture, and that was on Wednesday evening. And in the beginning, they were forecasting, quote, very large hail and possible tornadoes. And what we saw out of this was a wonderful community of aviation, where many of the people got out in time and were able to kind of escape the risk. But for those who were not, there was a group of people, everyone helped everyone else and did some wonderful things to just do their best to protect against the weather that was coming. And so you can see here this family putting cardboard onto the wings, in this case of their Cirrus, just in case, to see what they could do. Everyone just wants to protect their planes. This was a remarkable, one-of-a-kind twin engine. They called it the Jaguar, but version of vans with twin engines that someone had done, and they wrapped this whole plane in plastic. Not entirely sure how much that would protect against very large hail, but everyone's got to do whatever they can to try to protect it. People were putting comforters and moving blankets on the wings of their planes. We were next to this historic P-51 Mustang that got completely wrapped in plastic, as you can see here with tarps. This is over at the American Bonanza Society tent, and they did their best to put some cardboard on top and cover the wings in case something were to happen. This is a really amazing, a beautiful MU-2, same thing. People on top putting cardboard down, doing everything that they could to protect their aircraft. And I love this one. I love this Cessna that actually had carpeting on it. That, as far as I'm concerned, that steals the show when you get that. We did see a King Air, I will say, that it was at Black Hawk that was actually in the show, and they had gone and gotten twin mattresses, full, like real mattresses, and taped them to the tops of the wings. And so again, there's this, and there's our friend here, Adrian Eichhorn. And we went over and used the covers from our aircraft because we managed to find a way to move the plane to a local airport close by and get it in a hangar. And we brought our covers back and helped Adrian protect his plane, which he wasn't able to get out, including his wingtips with t-shirts here from SocialFlight. So we wrapped everything we could, and then we had the night air show the next day. We're here fortunate to be there with the whole Patey family, the big wall of fire, and what ends Oshkosh, and our flight home. And so with that, just wanted to point out that all of this stuff and some great videos are on our YouTube channel. Check that out. And with that, I would like to now go and begin the introduction here. Mike Wankum, pilot and meteorologist for WCVB in Boston. With over 30 years of experience, Mike is an award-winning forecaster with 14 regional Emmy Awards, as well as numerous AP and Mass Broadcaster Awards for his weather coverage. In 2017, the Washington Post listed him as one of the 7 coolest meteorologists in the United States. And prior to arriving in Boston, Mike was chief meteorologist at WTVR in Richmond, Virginia, and also served as chief meteorologist out in Sioux City, Iowa. And so coming out of Briarcliff University, he understands Tornado Alley. He has been involved in tornado chases early in his career, and all 3 of his children have witnessed tornadoes. I'm going to bring Mike on the line now. And in addition, Mike's a motorcycle enthusiast, licensed amateur road racer, and of course, a pilot. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Jeffrey, it's so great to be here. It really is. Just really thrilled. I was really hoping you'd bring me some cheese curds, though. It's been a while since I've been in the Midwest, and I would love to have some, but I understand.
The squeaky cheese, right?
Oh yeah. As you were going through those pictures, I was kind of going, oh, I remember that. I was getting a tear in my eye. It was wonderful. I wish and I grew up in Iowa, and I never ever got to Oshkosh, and always wanted to go there. And so I love seeing your pictures. Those are awesome. So.
Oh, well, we have to get you out there then. I'm going to convince you to do that, especially because if you were there, we would have been able to ask you all these questions about the storm. I'm going to ask you later now, but man, you would have. I felt like calling you at that time, going, "Do I move the plane? Do I not move the plane? What's really happening?"
It was really kind of a scary thing. You want to talk about it now, or would you like to wait a little bit, or what would you like to do?
I want to hear about you first. I want to
okay, sure.
And then we'll come back, because that is something I want to teach some people about weather. But it all starts with you and why you're here with us tonight. And so I do have another picture. This is a little bit of a picture show tonight. I love this one. You sent me a few pictures here, and if we're going to start something here, it's got to be that apparently you were afraid of puddles very, very early on in life.
Yeah, you're worried about the floods. I obviously grew up with 4 boys. I'm in Iowa. That is spring in Iowa, by the way, with snow up to your armpits pretty much. And so I'm about 8 years old there, but I was always interested in the weather. My mother got me dressed up in my little bow tie, and I was all set to go. But the pants were probably a little on the short side at that point.
And tell me about this one too. This has got to be pretty early on.
This is in college, and you did little TV shows, and this is many years ago. So, you get the size of the cameras and everything like that. But the instructor who didn't, he was kind of standing off to the side, didn't realize what we were doing. But the anchor and I are actually holding hands at this point, and he was very mad about that, for years later. And Julie, who was the anchor there, she went on and worked for ABC and some other stations around the country, and that I did as well. So it's been kind of funny, and it was just hilarious when I got this picture in, and you look back and go, oh my goodness, look at that. And it was black and white.
That's amazing. That's, and I when I first saw it, I'm like, okay, I'm a little confused because on one hand, this is a black and white picture that's obviously from a long time ago. On the other hand, there's a .com it says on the camera. So something.
I never even noticed that. That's no, it's not a .com. That was
Cable
actually
com.
the cable com. Cable communication, I think it was. I think it was a precursor to one of the big cable companies. But yeah, it was like that little studio that they used to be in every town. Everybody had their own little cable company station, and at that time, I think this is what we were doing. So I don't think it was .com. In fact, I can guarantee you it wasn't .com because I knew the guys who started some of the .com stuff, and they weren't even around yet.
Now tell me about this one. This is a little later.
Yeah, well, this is about 1985, and I was able to do a lot of aviation stories, especially being in Iowa and being in Sioux City, Iowa, particularly. Sioux City, Iowa, back in World War II, was one of the large air bases for the B-17 bombers. So aviation was very big in the Midwest. I picked up my pilot's license at that time as well. This happens to be a story I was doing about migratory waterfowl and aircraft intrusion. And so we were getting some planes that were getting hit by these birds flying through because it's right on the migratory path. And so I was able to do a story. It's also when I had a lot more hair and it was red at that time too.
Here's another one.
This is a little later. Now this is in Boston, but what I want you to not necessarily look at oh, look at that three-piece suit, a two-piece suit with a double button. Anyhow, it's not about fashion. But what I wanted to show here is that, see how the band there, 12 to 18 inches, and it goes somewhere from about Concord, New Hampshire to Plymouth, Massachusetts. Those were the days. Now this is early 90s that we're talking about. But in those days, it was perfectly acceptable to put these big bands of snow, 12 to 18. I can remember one time there was a guy across town, and he put a map up one time that said 2 to 24 inches and put a band up there. And that was perfectly acceptable at that time because people were just like, it was considered a victory. If you said, it's going to snow tomorrow, and it snowed tomorrow, that was considered a win. The criteria wasn't quite as what it is today. Today now, what you want is you want to know how much snow is going to fall in my driveway, so I know what my plow operator is going to charge me. I want to know what time it starts, what time it stops, will it change over to rain at any point, will it go back and forth, all of those things, and everybody wants to know that now. So 20, 30 years ago, you were perfectly acceptable if you just said it was going to snow tomorrow, and it snowed tomorrow. And the bands, wow, they got that pretty darn close. But now today, sometimes the audience actually wants to know more than what the science is capable of doing. So it just kind of tells you how things have changed, and people are really, really depending on weather more and more every day compared to what we did even like 30 years ago, it seems like.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to put a picture up that also that you sent me if you want to contrast that with what you're doing now.
Yeah, and I wanted to show you this one. This is a computer model. Now we get computer models. Just for those of you who are big into weather geeky stuff, we have the European and the US model, the GFS model, that come out and give us about the next 10 days forecast. So what happens is you start with these very large models out here, more of a global perspective. And as we get in closer, say within, depending on the model, between 48 and 72 hours, we start to go into more of a high resolution model. So these models, even that are way out here in the global perspective, are kicking out numbers all the time. They're giving you rough estimates of what goes on. So this happens to be one that's probably for a snowstorm that's out, say, 7 or 8 days. Now, if I put this on TV, people will just start, well, first off, they'll clean out all the stores. There'll be no bread, milk, or beer left. They'll just be, and then, of course, it's never going to happen that way. So when you look at forecasts, and many people now are looking at their apps, because the apps are raw computer data, and they'll look at that and they'll say, wow, for this case, 29 inches of snow in Boston next Thursday. Ooh, that's going to be bad. But I don't want you to think that's going to actually happen. What happens is that you're going to kind of work, and you're going to see how the computer models work. So what we try to do as a meteorologist, We look at these global models, we get them closer and closer, and hopefully they come together in a unified decision. And then the regional models come in and they kind of clarify that even more, and then we can get more detail. But if you look at what something kicks out, say 10 days ago, and then expect that's actually going to happen, the odds of it actually happening are probably in the neighborhood of about 1 to 2%. So be careful about those apps that are out there. Some of the apps are really good. Some of the apps are not so good. And that's where meteorologists come in. We sort of take that raw data and put it together and say, okay, I remember last time we had this type of storm, or this particular winter has been really trending more cold or windy or whatever, and we can start to then kind of shape and mold those things. So what I like to think of as a computer model is just sort of a big lump of clay that's dropped on my desk, and now my goal is to shape it into this beautiful vase, this forecast that's just perfect. That's the goal. And as I'm sure your audience will tell you, we're not always right.
No, but at least if you get that it is going to snow, that is still a victory.
Oh yeah, I can't remember what was the old saying. I shoveled 7 inches of partly cloudy off my driveway today. I mean, it was just, I mean that. But the thing is that the audience is really expecting you to be able to do that. And there are some times when you're staring, especially at a snowstorm, and you're going, wow, the water content, the temperature regime, and it's a really difficult challenge. And so sometimes the audience demand outstrips really what we have as science. And a lot of times, I look back on what we had for computer models, say 20 years ago. I don't even know how we did forecasting with those things. We used to call it, we would do 3-day forecast, and we would call 5-day fantasy land, because fantasy never worked out that way. We've gotten much better. And I will tell you that the 7-day forecast now is really about as accurate as our 3-day was, even just 10 years ago. So it's gotten much, much better. And some places have gone to the 10. We do a 10-day forecast every once in a while just to kind of show people a trend to what's going on. So the 10 does have some science to it. Once you go beyond 10, we enter kind of what we call the chaos period, where you're going more towards climate. You're probably not going to get fine details of what's going on, but certainly by day 6 and day 7, if it's a major snowstorm coming in, a major event of some kind, you're starting to see it already. So the forecasts are getting better and better, much to the disbelief of my audience who says you never get it right.
So tell me, let's talk a couple things. First of all, models. What is it? What does it mean, right? We hear a couple terms. We hear that like this, here's what the models are predicting, and then you always hear this term of, and this is what the European model is saying.
Correct.
So
yeah.
What are, I'm sure there's many models, but what are these two major things that they're talking about?
Right, the European model. That's an interesting. The Europeans dumped a lot of money into forecasting. They just had like this open budget that they said, we're just going to create the best forecasting models in the world. And they pretty much did. The thing is that if you have access to the European model, you have to pay for it. So if you use data from the European model, there's a charge to it, whether it's me as a TV station or me as a personal individual or a company that supplies you with that information. So somebody's paying for it along the way. And that's what they did. They said, okay, we're going to put a lot of money into this thing, but you're going to have to pay us to get this information. And so that's what they've done. And it's a very, very good model. The US had a different philosophy to it. And there's differences in how these forecast models actually bring data together and work. So the US said, you know what, we're going to make this a government project. We're going to put a lot of resources to it. We're going to continually evolve it. And I will say that it is getting better and better all the time. So, the GFS model, the US model is a much better model than what it was, say, 10 years ago. Maybe not as good as the European, but you always look at it because it might tap into something. So the US had a different approach. They said, you know what, we're going to fund this as a US science project, part of NOAA, and we're going to pay for it. And we're going to distribute it free, and it's going to be out there to really help people so they know what's going on. So different philosophies on how the basics went through it. Now, if the US had said, let's put as much money as the Europeans did it, would they have the same model? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure on that one. But the US model has gotten much, much better. And it does go out a little bit farther. So they also are different in how they deal with stuff. So it's almost like the US model sort of takes a snapshot and then crunches the numbers and runs it through there. The European is constantly evolving. It's sort of taking things, which makes sense logically, but also remember, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have a bad run, with bad information coming in, then the forecast is going to be corrupted that way. So you have to back up and start over and look at the previous model runs. And so these model runs are coming out. For the European, they come out twice a day. For the US model, they come out 4 times a day. So those are the big global models that you see coming in. And then as you get closer in, that's when you start to get even more models to deal with. So you deal with like the HRR, which is only 14 hours. Excellent for aviation because it really plots radar. And you can get these. These are free. You can find different sites that have the HRR model, the RPM. IBM has gotten into it. They have the IBM graph model, which is in there. You have the NAM model. There's a whole plethora of them. And then some that are specialized for example, for hurricanes. And these are all kind of like more what I would call a regional model. They have much more detail, much more fine-tuned. They run more often. They have a tendency, though, sometimes to really spike in one direction and then spike the other direction and go. So it says it's 30 inches of snow, and then, next one says it's 1.5 inches. So you have to be careful with those things as well. So the computer models really have revolutionized forecasting so much, but you have to really be careful with what they are. And sometimes when you get an app, the app is just kind of taking that model and just taking the raw numbers from it and saying,
Right.
without any human input, without any, previous climatology with it, and kicking it out. And that's why you can sometimes get some really odd numbers to show up too.
Yeah.
So.
It also seems confusing sometimes when you're watching, like if there's a national weather event happening, like a hurricane, it seems that so on a national level, a lot of times they'll be broadcasting and saying, and this is the track for the GFS model, and this is the track for the European model, and they don't say much more. And so you're left there at home as a viewer going, great.
Yeah.
So the Europeans are going to get it, or are we getting it? What does that mean?
Well, it's funny with hurricanes because what we'll do, used to take, it's called a spaghetti plot. And the reason it's called a spaghetti plot is because we would take all the computer models and we would trace them out. And this model goes this way, and this model goes that way, and this one goes this way. And it looked like somebody dumped a plate of spaghetti on a plate. And that's what it looked like. And so we called it a spaghetti plot. We're not that creative in weather. It's just the way it looked. And so we said, oh, it looks like spaghetti. Let's go with that. Okay, spaghetti plot. So the spaghetti plot, now originally the spaghetti plot had maybe 8 or 10 computer models. But now every TV station says, you know what? I think I can pull in now like 112 models. Some of them are climate, whatever. And it looks like even a bigger plate of spaghetti. So it's sort of like, maybe a little overkill there. But the one we really rely on a great deal is the National Hurricane Center. They're some of the really strongest experts in the world on hurricane tracking and what's going on, and they will issue their summary of what they believe, the analysis of what's going on. And for most of us, that's really what we look at. Now we might say, oh, it's coming in, for me, for example, I'm in New England, and they'll say it's coming over Long Island, and I'll say, no, it's going to be more toward Nantucket. I can differ from those kind of levels at that point. But really, the National Hurricane Center is probably the preeminent forecasters when it comes to hurricane, not just the United States, but in the world.
So let's understand it, or help me as the Weather for Idiots questionnaire here.
I have the Weather for Dummy book at home somewhere here. So
perfect, right? I was right, exactly. There you go. Perfect. So when you start with looking at things on a short time frame, and then you start looking wider and wider and wider. As a pilot, of course, we're all first looking at current conditions from the METARs, but then the next thing is really the TAF. Where does a terminal forecast, like who's developing terminal forecasts, and how do they figure out what models are they using at that level when you're talking, what is it, like 12 hours or something?
A lot of times what you're dealing with is when you're in a short term like that, and we switch over to like the HRR, which we've never really figured out how to do it. Most of our models we'll call like the NAM, which is the NAM, the HER, sometimes we call it a HER, but it's HRRR. And it really was designed just for the next 14 hours, and it's really focused on radar. So that I would say is your best short-term one. There are issues with it. It doesn't pick up some stuff sometimes or overemphasizes some things at times, but that's kind of the best short-term one that we have going on there. But the forecast is actually put together by the regional offices. For example, in Boston, it's not in Boston, it's actually in Taunton, and actually they just moved down the road, so it's actually in Norton now. But they will put together the aviation look of what's going on, kind of give their analysis of what's going on, feed it out to different organizations that can look at that. There are also private vendors as well. For example, you have WSI, which is in Andover, Massachusetts, and they will issue, their forecast, and they'll feeding it out, looking at it. So many times, as a pilot, as a meteorologist, as a farmer, you're looking at you've got maybe a couple of different sources here, and you're going, well, which one is right, And you have to kind of say, well, I like this one. It really does really well here. This one's not so good, checking and seeing, and then relying on your own information too of what you have, and hopefully you're relying on people like us who have done this for a long, long time, and we can say, here's what's going on. This is why it's happening, and hopefully we can explain it to you too. So you can say, well, if this doesn't happen this way, then this could happen, and so it gives you an idea of, I wake up and I go, oh, Mike said it was going to be cloudy and it's not cloudy yet. So that means, oh, it's slowing down. And remember, he had said that if it slows down, we won't get as much snow or ice or rain or those kind of things. So those are something to keep in.
It seems when it comes to the planning side that the challenge sometimes having to do with that is that you talk cloudy, and we get that on a larger level, but we have to go to something like the TAF to know, what does that mean? What are ceilings? Like, am I actually going to be able to? Kind of doesn't matter if it's cloudy at 10,000 feet. What am I going to be able to fly or not on it?
Yeah, and the other thing too, we were talking about the models too. Remember I said the European you have to pay for? So sometimes the US ones really they have access to it, but they don't have direct access to the European. So many times they do rely a lot of times on the US model, which again has gotten much, much better. So you can't discount it. And there are times when I look at the US model and I say, you know what, it's got a better handle on it than the European model does at this point. I would say probably if I were to rank them, I would say maybe 70% of the time I go European, but there's still that other 30% where I'm looking at the US model as well.
Yeah. The other thing is when you start looking further out, and we're seeing things as if we're looking at a regular forecast, as opposed to an aeronautical forecast, like a percentage chance of thunderstorms. And there's such a big difference there between a solid day where it's cloudy everywhere and you're talking embedded thunderstorms versus a 30% chance of a thunderstorm that is an isolated cell that is irrelevant because everyone can see it from 40 miles away and steer away from it.
Yes. Well, it's interesting too. Yeah, years ago we used to say, we would verify forecasts, and it was plus or minus 3 degrees. If you got it plus or minus 3 degrees, rain, no rain. Didn't matter whether it was a thunderstorm or whatever. So they've since tightened that up. So because we kept getting 100% accuracy, and everybody's going, no, they're not ready 100% of the time. So they had to tighten that up quite a bit. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The nature of the rain, the nature of the precipitation. Is it a full-fledged nor'easter? Is it a blizzard? Is it just snow? Is it a tornado producing thunderstorm? Is it a supercell all isolated by itself, or is it this whole line of thunderstorms that are coming through with perhaps a bow echo? So I mean, there's a lot of differences and nuances to it many, many times. And I remember when I was learning to be a pilot, I mean, the weather was a very, very large part of what we learned. And I used to actually take the Cessna handbook that had weather date, it was the weather chapter in there. And many times you're in a small market, you'll have somebody who's a reporter and they say, well, you're a reporter Monday through Friday, but we want you to do weather on the weekends. And they go, I don't know anything about the weather. So I would always make them do like the Cessna chapter of flight training to learn what weather was. And then they'll go, oh, that's what a cold front is. Oh, that's what a warm front is, And that was, it was probably the best condensed group, of information you could get, that one chapter on weather. So, as pilots, it's very, very important with the weather, obviously.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Well, this seems like an opportune time to talk for a minute about that storm and just that happened out there, and just to have an idea of where some of this even comes from. So let's talk timeline for a minute.
Sure.
So we when we woke up for the show and started driving in there, we were a little surprised. We're like, oh, we're ignorant about anything. Hadn't seen the weather for the day yet, and we're looking and like, wow, there's a lot of people departing from the airport. Look at all these departures happening. Maybe it's just Wednesday. Maybe it's just everything going on, And it's like a lot of planes leaving. In fact,
actually, they heard there were cheese curls down the street that were cheese.
Exactly.
But anyhow, go ahead.
Exactly. And then it literally wasn't until almost lunchtime when we were just so busy, and finally all of a sudden we saw this notice come out that that the National Weather Service, I believe is what they were saying, was making a prediction for the event area and issuing a warning. And it had some language I haven't actually seen, because it literally said, um, I don't know what chance they said, but they did say they were expecting very large hail, was the quote that they used, which I hadn't seen those words together before, and thunderstorms and possible tornadoes with winds up to 70 miles per hour at the airport of the show. And there's an image here I'll show, and I was looking at that like, where did this come from? Like, there's nothing
Actually,
about
you were just
before.
describing spring where I grew up in Iowa. But
Okay.
yeah, you had a couple things going on that were really interesting that day. And just to kind of give you some background or two, they have tried to now get more detailed on these severe weather outbreaks. So are we looking at tornadoes? Are we looking at hail? Are we looking at damaging wind, lightning and thunder, that kind of thing? They're trying to be more and more specific on those. So actually, we've now started getting severe thunderstorm warnings with an extra caveat to it. It says possible tornado. It's not a full-fledged tornado warning. They're not seeing the rotation going on inside, but they'll issue a warning that says severe thunderstorm, possible tornadoes. It's really interesting because it actually plots, at least on our computers anyway, the severe thunderstorm warning was a yellow box. And if you look really carefully, there's a really fine line of red all over on the outside of it. And that instantly tells me that that's okay. That's a severe thunderstorm, possible tornado. A full-fledged tornado warning would be a red box that would come up. And obviously, different TV stations use different things, and they're using different, different colors. But those are the standard colors that are used by the National Weather Service. So they are trying to get more and more detailed. They're trying to let people know, instead of just saying there's a chance of severe thunderstorm, here's the kind of severe thunderstorm we're looking at. We're looking at hail. This one was really interesting. First off, they were putting the tornado possible. And so they boosted that category up as well. The other one was the hail. And the hail was that way because aloft that day was really, really cold air. If you went up to about 18,000 feet, it was actually about 18, 19 degrees below zero. And the reason I know this so well, not because of Wisconsin, but because that whole cell worked its way toward Boston, and we had the exact same thing happening on Friday. We were watching for it. So much so that we were concerned about possibly having a tornado overnight. So what we did is we staffed it overnight. We actually stayed in. I did half-hour updates starting at midnight, 12:30, 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, just so that if people woke up in the middle of the night, thunder and lightning scares them to death, they wake up out of bed, what's going on here? The dog's in bed with me. They could turn in TV and they could say, okay, it's all right. It's a garden variety thunderstorm, or this is really something serious. One of the things that we have noted here in New England is that we tend to get tornadoes forming along warm fronts, which is a little unusual, and they tend to happen toward the morning more than the afternoon. That said, there's always, exceptions to those rules. But what you're looking at here, where they say around a severe thunderstorm, you're looking at some very cold air aloft. You're looking at this bubble of high pressure that's sitting out over Rapid City, incredible heat there, contrasting air masses coming through, that low pressure moving out of North Dakota, sliding through. And if you can get a thunderstorm to build up and can tap into that cold air aloft where it's so cold out there, first off, you touch a raindrop into it, boom, it's ice, and you get a couple motions of that, and boom, you've got large hail coming down, which is why they were going with large hail, which means bigger than 1 inch in diameter. So that was the reason they were concerned about that. And it was a very valid forecast. It may not have worked specifically. For example, you look at this one here, this covers everything really from Ohio up through, almost up to the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. So they were looking at a very large area, and they just want everybody in this area to be cautious about it. As we get closer and closer to the event, they'll start to bring that down, maybe build a watch box, maybe they can get a little more detail to it. So there you see that area in red there where we go with the moderate risk of thunderstorms, which, by the way, is my own little 2 cents here. I hate the terminology that they use. They use slight, marginal, and then they go extend. It seems like it's all a little backwards. But you look at the colors and you say, oh, red, that doesn't seem good for me. But that was the area where they said, this is where we need to worry about it. And if you could just take that little bubble and just kind of run it right down to New Jersey, 2 days later, you had tornadoes in New Jersey. And we were on the northern fringe of it in Boston, and we were very concerned about that happening overnight. And there was a point during the middle of the night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday, I actually started to see broad rotation. It was weak, but it was broad rotation. And if that had tightened up, we would then have to be probably issuing some tornado warnings, maybe along the south coast toward Nantucket, which never gets tornadoes, but that's just the kind of scenario that you were looking at there. So that was that. It was a dynamic situation, obviously.
Yeah, it was. I found it fascinating that it did seem very urgent, very directed, and very specific,
Mm-hmm.
that it was actually coming there. And when you looked north, you could see it was incredibly intense, further north, north and west of the Oshkosh area. Um, but it seemed to dissipate to some degree as it came down.
Right.
It did turn into we didn't, I don't think we really got the wind that was predicted. We certainly did not get the hail. Uh, the lightning and thunder was spectacular. I have probably never seen such a broad area of so much lightning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was kind of everywhere you looked all the
Yep.
time.
I'll tell you a story. My wife is from Seattle, and they do not get lightning very often. And so when we were first dating and she would come to Iowa to visit me, I could take her to the bluffs and watch the lightning storms going on in the Midwest, and she thought that was unbelievable. It was the cheapest date I ever had. So, if you want to impress the girl from Seattle, you take them out and you show them lightning. Wait till we go chasing tornadoes, dear. You'll really love that part. So, yeah, the lightning is unbelievable. And the other thing is, we still don't know a lot about lightning. We still, we're really learning it all the time. And so, you kind of think of the hailstones inside there as sort of rubbing against each other like this. And many times, you in the winter, you walk across the floor with some wool socks on, you touch the doorknob, you get that little spark off there. You're actually creating a little lightning bolt there. And so we believe that action going on inside the thunderstorm is really what's creating those separation of charges. And then you get that, the spark that goes in between them. We've learned that there's positive and negative charges. One stays on a little bit longer on an object longer than the other one. One's a bit louder. And one is more apt to cause fires, because it keeps the charge on there for a little bit longer. So we're learning more and more about lightning. And I've always told people, for example, if you're in hail, you're in the most dangerous part of a storm. So that's the most dangerous part. That's also probably where we're going to have the most lightning going on with it as well. Now, whether you actually get rotation to take place, that's always a challenge because the rotation may be going on up inside and it may not even stick out the bottom. So we might issue a tornado warning based on Doppler radar because all Doppler radar is, a simple definition of it is if you've been picked up for speeding, I know me either. But if you've ever been picked up for speeding, you are really familiar with Doppler radar. All you were doing is you were seeing how fast the car came at you. And all they're doing right now is they're seeing how fast the raindrops are going this way. And if you see a bunch of raindrops going that way, and the two are like this, then you're going to get some spinning motion going on. So that's what we're looking at inside there. Now, we might be looking at, say, 6,000 feet up into the air. And we might be seeing this rotation here, but we're not seeing it at the bottom yet. And that's where, spotters come in and really kind of keep an eye on what's going on actually in your community of what's happening. But you have to know what's going on inside the storm sometimes before you can figure out what's going on at the bottom. And the bottom you may never, ever get. A tornado in this case. In your case, with those thunderstorms out there, you may have had like a wall of thunderstorms coming, they die out and then could reform later on, but you were kind of in a lull that could develop there. And we have actually, when thunderstorms start working together, it almost, and you'll see some people who will even use this term, they'll say it's like an inland hurricane. It's thunderstorms are working together to create this what we used to call mesoscale convective complex. Then it became mesoscale convective system. Big long name for it, but MCCs you might hear them use, or MCS as well. And so what you're seeing with those is you're seeing this complex coming through, and it's sort of like one thunderstorm dies and builds a new one, and this process goes on, much like what's going on in a hurricane. A hurricane, my freshman professor in college used to say, all a hurricane is a bunch of thunderstorms playing Ring Around the Rosie. And I've never forgotten that one, and it's very true. It's thunderstorms working together. So an MCC or MCS is doing the same thing. It's the thunderstorms working. Now, they're not spinning necessarily, but they are a line that's kind of working its way through, and that line can continue for many miles. It can go across states. It can go from Wisconsin all the way to Boston holding together. And there was a very powerful derecho that happened out in Iowa a couple of years ago. Tremendous winds that went all the way across the state. So that's always a possibility, and that's why everybody gets kind of concerned about when they see these dynamics coming together in the atmosphere. Whether it actually translates to your exact location, maybe not, but it might be just a few miles down the road, a few miles this way or that way too.
What are some tips then for the average, let's say for the average pilot who's on the ground, we'll say
Mhm.
you're on the ground there, to when you watch an event like this, like
Mhm.
what helps you determine the difference between something that looks like it's actually let's say we're looking at radar
Mhm.
and you see something coming. How can you tell what is something that's likely to actually be getting worse and worse, or at least holding its shape and motivates you enough to do things like we did, scramble, pay
Mhm.
someone, get your
Yeah.
plane under cover, whatever you need to do, versus things that often break up.
Mhm.
Are there certain things that the average pilot can look at?
Well, obviously looking at radar. And remember, a storm that once, even like a hurricane or any type of storm, it can get to a certain level and then it destroys itself. It starts to tear itself apart. So if you're looking at a tornado, or excuse me, a thunderstorm that has very vivid reds and oranges with it, the chances and likelihood of that holding together for a long period of time diminishes over time. And also remember, thunderstorms rely a lot on heat and moisture, so that's why early afternoon is your most likely time into the afternoon. But many times you can get thunderstorms happening in the middle of the night. As I mentioned, we've seen this predominance of tornadoes actually happening overnight or early morning, pre-dawn hours in New England. So we're learning more and more about it. It also may be we're seeing more of that because our detection equipment is so much better than what it used to be. It used to be maybe you had a tornado in the middle of the night and it was out in the middle of Nebraska and nobody ever saw it. Nobody really cared. The three
Mm,
cows that saw it, that was about all. But it's so now we're able to detect these things. Hurricanes is a great example. We're naming stuff now that 20 years ago we didn't even know was out there. But they're getting hurricane names now, and so we're going through the alphabet like crazy. We had to go through the Greek alphabet. Now they've changed that again this year, so it's always changing. But as a pilot, what I would look at is to see the line that's coming at you. If you're seeing the individual supercell, that's kind of like it's like right there, it's round kind of thing. That's going to be all right. That's going to be really intense right through there. If you're seeing something that's shaped more like a bow and arrow, like a bow,
yeah, like a comma type thing also.
yeah, like that. That's a bow echo, and that's going to mean some very strong winds with you. So we look for those specific types of signatures. A bow echo is going to create wind all the way along that whole thing, whereas the supercell is going to probably create it right there. The other thing you can see is if you're looking at a radar image and you see what appears to be almost like a light little bit of rain out ahead of it. Maybe you have the big cell here, and then out ahead of it here, big cell here. Love TV. And then out ahead of it, there's this little, like kind of like a light line. It looks like light precip. That's more than likely a gust front. So you're going to see some very strong winds that develop right through there. So what happens is the thunderstorm, it's sucking air in. It's like a big Hoover vacuum cleaner, but it's also kicking air out. And that's that gush of air that comes out. And that actually then can create almost a separate cold front, which then can build more thunderstorms on top of it. And there are also all kinds of little idiosyncrasies in other parts of the country. For example, in New England, we have a sea breeze that sets up. Pretty common, and the thunderstorms can form along that. You're just looking for any type of convergence zone where things are brought together, and you'll see that. I mean, Florida every afternoon, 3:12 in the afternoon, you get the thunderstorms right along the sea breeze line. It's like so predictable. It's like really boring weather, but but those are some of the things that you look at. So if you're starting to see the intensity really increasing, it's probably going to be pretty dangerous for you. If you're seeing the intensity decreasing, obviously it's getting better for you. You can still get a pretty good blow. And even as a thunderstorm collapses, you can get those microbursts that can develop out of that. Very, very strong winds out of it as well.
Well, one really, really interesting thing that I grasped that about what you said, not only what you said about growth or things that are dissipating, but I was reflecting back. You're right. Like when I have looked and been looking at radar that's, let's say, 2 or more hours away from my current location, uh, the times when you see the most intense activity, things that are like purple on the map,
Hmm.
on like the systems that we use or things like that, uh, those seem to be the ones that don't quite make it to you still purple.
Right, right.
Whereas those other ones where you're looking and it looks like it's coming your way. If it's building, if it's getting more yellow now, more red now, maybe it becomes purple when it gets to you.
Right, exactly, because you're seeing the development stages to it. I mean, there's a very definite with a thunderstorm especially, it develops, it's a mature, and then it collapses. And sometimes that can build into another thunderstorm, but it really has a defined time period that it goes through. Many times too, you'll actually see in the distance, you might see those puffy cumulus clouds developing in the afternoon, and that's going to give you an indication of where that line is going to start, probably even before radar shows up. It doesn't have enough moisture into it yet, so you'll start to see that and you go, okay, this is an area where we're going to watch it. I will see it in New England where I'll see the sea breeze line. I'll see some puffy like cumulus clouds developing there, and I go, okay, that's an area that may give us some issues, this afternoon in a couple of hours. We've really got to keep an eye on that, because that's where you see convergence. And if you see radar, you'll actually see it, they'll put it into what's called a clear air mode, and many times you'll see where the air currents are actually moving together. They're tracking dust, they're tracking insects, and you can actually see there's a convergence zone of some type, maybe so subtle you wouldn't even notice it if you were outside, but just that little bit of difference is where you may start to see those thunderstorms then firing up along that line.
Wow. And you said there's a fairly defined period of time. Is there any, obviously there's going to be outliers, but in general, how long would a thunderstorm be at its most intense stage?
Not much more than, an individual thunderstorm itself, not much more than about an hour at most, then it's going to be dissipating. So, I mean, that's at its most intense. But again, there are always outliers to that. A supercell, for example, that's one thunderstorm that's kind of developed all by itself, and that can feed on all that heat and humidity around it. That one's going to last longer. That's going to build up there. And those are the ones that, you see the anvil on top of them, they'll top off at 60,000 feet. That's a supercell. That's all by itself. It has nothing else. It's just able to draw on everything around it. As opposed to a line where the line is it's starting to fight with, it's like a bunch of brothers getting together and they say, hey, I want the hot, humid air. It's mine. No, it's yours. It's mine. And so they kind of fight and tear things apart. The supercell is obviously the most dangerous, and that's the one that really can put a tornado down pretty quickly. And that's what you see a lot of, through Tornado Alley from Iowa down through Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, in those areas.
Do they have does supercells have a time frame in general, or no?
They will last longer because they just have that much more. They tend to be, and they're beautiful at night. If you ever see lightning coming off those things, or if you've ever been in a commercial aviation, you have to fly around them. A general aviation, you're a little lower and not as quite as much fun to look at. But just to see the amount of lightning that's going on with those things, they really are stunning. I mean, there's weather is scary to some people, and it should be, and you need to respect it, but it can also be some of the most beautiful stuff that you've ever seen. I mean, even just to look at a satellite imagery of a hurricane and just see how it flows together, or a thunderstorm and time lapse to see what's going on inside there. Even a lightning bolt. We've really started to get some really fascinating high-speed cameras of lightning bolts, and to see how they snake across the sky, and each bolt has its dart leaders and strikers, and we're even learning about lightning now that shoots out the top of these thunderstorms. It's really fascinating stuff that we see going on with that.
Oh man, that is amazing. I think the other question that's in my head as a pilot flying is that there a lot of times you'll see active weather radar or satellite weather or ADS-B weather, and when you're looking at these cells, we really don't seem, at least, to have information that helps us know. In some cases, that means rain's making it all the way to the ground. It's very intense. It's everything else. In other cases, we see, I've gotten there, and it's at 10,000 feet. And there's nothing. There isn't even any turbulence, and it's showing as yellow. Is there anything at all that we can look up as pilots to try to figure out the difference between those kinds of things?
Well, I mean, surface observations, or taking a look at your METARs and see what's going on there. You have to remember, the curvature of the Earth. Sorry for all of you who are members of the Flat Earth Society, this doesn't work, but anyhow. But the curvature of the Earth is such that the curvature of the Earth is such that if you put a radar beam up, you can't get the radar beam to bend across the Earth. So it's slicing up through. In the old days, and I hate to say I remember these days, but in the old days, the radar operator would actually sit there and they would start slicing the thing apart. They would look at it and go that way. They found that it would actually work better if we put it on a program and just slice the atmosphere at intervals and put it all together. But in the old days, the radar operator would actually sit there and kind of, oh, let's take a look at this one. Oh, look at that, and then slice it up here and slice it up here. So we get a much better volume look of what's going on. But just for an example, if you were, I'll use Boston for an example. The radar site is actually in Taunton, Massachusetts, southeastern part of the state. If we're looking at something in, say, Fitchburg, which is in the northern part of the state, approximately, let's say, 60 miles or so, you're shooting about 6,000 feet into the storm. So you're shooting up in there, and that's why when we say we're looking for rotation at higher levels, and then we're slicing all the way up through it to see what's in there. But there's just the curvature of the Earth. We just can't get a flat picture of what's happening there.
So that's fascinating. So what you're saying is, if we, as consumers of radar data, as someone who's just, looking at a radar, if we know where the sites are that are producing that, we can have a better idea of the accuracy of the altitude of what's coming back.
Correct, absolutely. And what we'll do, the radars that are out there that we're using, they're strategically placed in different places. So we have, it's like why is there a radar in Taunton? I mean, Boston is a much more populated area, but by putting it in Taunton, you now can slice through Boston and you can slice through Providence to find out what's going on. What they did was, this is back in the early 90s, they said, okay, where are we going to put these radar sites? We're not going to put them in places where there's a lot of people, because there's a dome around it that a cone of silence, basically. You can't get the information on it, because if it's actually getting hit, there's sort of like this cone around it. So we want to get it away from populated centers. What they did is they took—
You mean like the cone above it that doesn't—
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and if the radome itself is getting hit, then you're getting reflectivity off of that. And there's some funny stories about that, but we sometimes they'll put a radar site up, or this happened when they were doing it back in the early 80s when they're putting the radars in, is that they would put it in and then realize, oh, there's a church steeple over here that keeps interfering. It looks like there's thunderstorm going. The one we've seen a lot of lately are the windmills getting put in. And the windmills actually generate a disturbance, and if you know what's there, then you can basically, algorithm it out and say, okay, ignore that spot right there. It just shows up as a whole. But what they did was, years ago, they took a nighttime visible satellite imagery of the United States, and they looked at it and said, okay, population center here, not much here. Let's put the radars where they will cover the most based on lights at night, because we knew that was over population centers. So that's why the radar sites ended up where they're at. And so very few of them are actually in cities per se. They're more outside of cities. They're cross-referencing. So, for example, I will use the Portland radar site. I'll use which is not in Portland, but we call it that, Portland radar site, Boston radar site, Albany radar site. And by cross-referencing that, I can get a better look. So maybe this one's shooting a little lower than this one, and now I get a volume scan of what's happening there. So I have a better idea of what's happening on the ground. So it's really kind of, I would advise against looking at a single site radar unless it's something you're very specifically looking for. I will use a single site when I'm looking for severe weather. So if I'm looking for a tornado and I want to see what the volume scan is looking at, or let's say I want to look at the velocities inside there, I will use a single site radar to see what's going on, so I can get a slice that way. However, I may not see the thunderstorm that's 10 miles the other way because this one's blocking it. And so that's why I always caution about using a single site. Use more of a regional composite if you possibly can.
Right. But it sounds like even a regional composite, there's a takeaway here for all of us as pilots, that if we keep a map somewhere, there aren't that many. So if we keep a map somewhere in the area that we normally fly and put a little dot where all these major sites are that are generating this, that might tell us a little bit about what I'm pretty far out from any of these. I'm kind of in the center of all these. So this stuff I'm seeing could be high versus it's very close to something. It could be very low.
Correct. Yeah, and we're working on new programs and stuff where we can take what's going on in the side of the thunderstorm and translate that down using more algorithms and actual observation. So that's why we're able to kind of get a better idea of perhaps debris or things like that coming out of a tornado. It gives us some idea of what's happening there. So there are some new products which are coming out, and it's changing all the time. I mean, it's really fascinating. I mean, some of the greatest scientists in the world are actually working on weather forecasting. So it's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, and with all the things that continue to happen with weather, that seems to be getting more and more extreme in many cases, or at least that's the perception of it. It's only gonna get more interesting. It's only gonna get more exciting.
I honestly thought when the Weather Channel came out in 1980 that was pretty much it for local weather. and it's gotten even more people. More people tune in for weather than anything else on television right now. I know that there are several new cable operations that are trying to start up that are just strictly weather. So you'll have 4 or 5 weather channels going on. It's great for meteorologists. We all stay employed, you know. So, but it really is the number one reason people watch the TV newscast is to find out what's going on in the weather. And I will tell you, our European friends look at it and go, really? It's a very American thing. We want to know our weather.
Yep, that makes sense. A couple last things, because we're running out of time quick, but oh my God, I could talk to you for hours on all of this. So one thing I desperately want to get in here also is what's the impact been of all of this crowdsourced weather? You know, people have weather stations in their houses now. There's networks of all of it, and what's been that impact to you as a professional in getting all of this information?
Nothing has ever been invented to replace the human eye. You know, if I see it on radar and I've got somebody that can confirm it or say, no, it's not doing that, that is the perfect thing. So social media is, I'm on it all the time, trying to find out, you know, if I see a cell here, you know, maybe somebody's putting out a picture or tells me there's hail going on there. It really confirms exactly what we have going on. So the social media stuff, it has been phenomenal for us. And I will tell you, there's some very interesting stuff. It happens to be a group out of Harvard, Climacell, is working on cell phones and cell phone distortion because of weather. And at that point, they're actually able to then create, I'll simplify it, but basically make radar on the ground on a block by block basis using the distortions created by cell phone signals. It's fascinating stuff that they're working on. They've just now become commercial, but I was at an opportunity to visit them many years ago when they were just in startup, and it's really some interesting things. So whatever we're talking about now, check back in a year. There's going to be even more interesting things going on.
Yeah, and I mean, do you look at things like Weather Underground, where you've got everyone's personal stations, things like that?
Yes, we actually have access to that as well. Weather Underground is kind of taking that and commercialized it, made it available to everybody. We have what's called the Coco Ram, which has been going on for a number of time. There's a lot of people, but there's more and more people. You know, I'm looking off to my left over here. I've got a weather station right here. You know. You know, you're tapping into that. You're able to find more information what's going on. But really, that little picture tweeted to me of hailstones, boom, I know right away what's going on. Any of those kind of things. So the awesome. Human eye and the camera are just phenomenal for weather forecasting.
Awesome. And so we've gotten certainly a huge list of people commenting and questions and things like that. I'm trying to fit them in, but you know, the big one thing, of course, people want to know is, aside from the ability to tune in directly to WCVB and see you giving them their weather, or if they're in another part of the country, do you have any personal favorites of sites that you would recommend people use?
I like to use, for radar, I like to use Radar Scope. It taps me right into it. I think it costs maybe $10 a year or something like that. I think that's really good. But again, that's a single site, so be careful with that one. You know, I like that one a lot. It's really a direct forecasting. Forecasting, my personal thing is I look at the models. So I'm looking at the raw data coming out. So if you called me up and said, hey, what's the weather in Oshkosh? The first thing I'm gonna do is look at the raw computer models to see what's going on. I will tell you, the National Weather Service, very good. There's some very good forecasters. Not every office is probably as good as, say, the one in Boston, but the Boston forecasters are probably some of the best in the world. They're very, very good. They're very detailed, and they're very helpful with stuff as well. So the National Weather Service forecast is really very good. Sometimes they have to much like we do. We have to kind of you know, we cover a very large area. So I can't be real specific on something like that. And they have to do the same thing, but they will break it down into zones for you, give you a good idea with there. So I would say, you know, that would be your first step to go there. And those are free. You know, you can, you know, just go to the Weather Service and kind of look at it and see what they've got going on. Some of the other ones that are out there, different, you know, there's some of our competitors of ours, some of our with us. I think WSI has done some really good stuff with advanced radar. You know, forecasting radar movements and stuff. I know MIT is working on some really great programs over at Lincoln Labs with it as well. So there's a lot of stuff that's working in that direction to try to get, you know, the basic radar information and then carry it forward a few hours, maybe as much as 12 or 14 hours, and show exactly what's going to be happening there. And we're seeing more and more of that. That's looking better and better all the time.
That's absolutely fantastic. And then lastly, we've had some people ask, of course, the takeaways and to learn any favorite books or anything like that, or
Ooh,
is there
books.
any chance you'll be working on one for people?
No, I don't have the patience to write a book. I wish I did. I will tell you, probably one of my favorite all-time books, Sebastian Junger's Perfect Storm. I will tell you, when I read the book, when we got to the weather part, I kind of skipped through it because I already knew that part. But
Nothing about educating people on weather. No, they're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
hey, you
I
really
think
want
he
to
did a
learn
pretty
more?
good
Get
job
this
with it,
book.
but I mean, it's just a great story, and you hear about the storm and what happened, and just to see the power of it. So those are really some good things. I can remember. I'll take you back many years ago. The movie Twister came out.
Yes,
And I helped host the premiere of it in Boston. And this had to be back in the early 90s, maybe late 80s. I have to
yes.
look it up and anything like that. So anyhow, I'm watching it. It's a very dynamic, very, drama-filled moment in the show. And a guy comes out and he says, that looks like an F5. And I break out laughing in the theater because I know the guy who just did it. He's a meteorologist up in Minneapolis. So sometimes what I see in weather and movies, for example, please do not take Twister as verbatim what happens. Cows do not float by you, in a storm.
No, we
So
all know it's not that. It's sharks.
yeah,
That's
sharks. Yeah, oh, Sharknado, which we and when Sharknado came out, they sent every meteorologist in the country a T-shirt. That was the most coveted T-shirt that I could give to people. They said, "Can I get your Sharknado T-shirt?" And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. So there've been some fun stuff with weather as well.
Oh my God. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on the show, and I hope you will come back because we have just scratched the surface. We could come up with topic after topic, and this has just been fascinating. We have so many questions we're not able to get to, and I would absolutely love to have you back on the show.
Anytime, I would love it. It's a great opportunity. So many times with TV weather, we're limited to 2.5, 3 minutes, and we don't really have a chance to kind of explain what's going on. And this is a great opportunity for it. So I really, I salute you what you're doing on this program. I think it's fantastic for the aviation community and just anyone who's interested in aviation. I think that's great. So it's terrific. I'm glad I could be part of it tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And as always, thanks to all of you who have taken time out of your evening to join us here for Social Flight Live on Tuesday evening. We will make sure that we get Mike back. I have requests for that already, Mike, so we'll be marking up your calendar and talking in more detail and picking some subjects to go through. But to all of you, I am absolutely thrilled. We had the month of July off. It's August. We are back, and thrilled to have you on again as well. And so again, be sure to check out socialflight.com and the SocialFlight mobile apps. You'll see all the events coming up. You'll see what the other guests that we have coming on. And just to put a cap on that, next Tuesday, August 10th, we have Elena Lewis from Culver Props going to talk about how she builds wooden props for aircraft. And then on the 17th at 8 p.m. again, Rick Peterson, air show announcer extraordinaire. You listen to Rick anytime that you go to a major air show. And so more and more of the wonderful personalities that are out there and that just support our lives, help us through these challenging times and bring a little joy. And so for that, Mike, I thank you so much for taking time out of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to everyone else out there, I wish you all blue skies.